All right, here we go. I'm going to just dive into it. What happened before the Iliad? It's really long, so bear with me. The judgment of Paris. Across the Aegean Sea that lies to the east of Greece, there once flourished a great city. This city was called Ilion by its own people, but in the story and song, it is known as Troy. It stood on a sloping plain some distance back from the shore and was surrounded by high, strong walls that no enemy could scale or batter down. When the Trojans looked at the solid walls and noble buildings of the city, they boasted, Ilion will stand forever. King Priam, the ruler of this great city, seemed favored by the gods, for he had great wealth, the swiftest horses, and many strong and brave sons. The strongest and bravest was named Hector, while the youngest and most beautiful was Paris. Just before Paris was born, the oracle had prophesied that Priam's wife, Queen Hecuba, would give birth to a burning torch that would one day burn to the ground the strong walls and high towers of Troy. When the king and queen saw the beautiful face and noble features of the newborn babe, they could hardly believe that he was destined to be the ruin of his people. But they also knew that to ignore the prophecies of the oracle would be unwise indeed. And so they faced a terrible choice to await the certain destruction of their city or to destroy the lovely child. King Priam feared for the safety of his people, and so with great sadness he commanded that a shepherd should carry the babe to Mount Ida, and leaving him there to die. That's so sad. The shepherd obeyed the king unwillingly, and then returned to his home, heavy at heart, thinking of the helpless baby boy, he had left alone on the mountain. At last he could bear the thought no longer, and he hastened back. To his joy, he found the little prince still alive, so he carried him home in secret and kept him there as his own child. Aw. Paris, as the boy was named, grew up with the sheep herd lads, never suspecting that he was a king's son. He grew tall and straight and so beautiful that his fame spread abroad. So he tended sheep on the mountainside while the time drew near when the prophecy was to be fulfilled. Now it happened at this time in Greece that a great wedding was to be held between the king of a far off country and a fair sea nymph, Thetis. Kings and queens and princes and princesses were invited. Okay, had to stop for a second. Where were we? Upon a high throne at the head of the hall sat mighty Zeus, and near him was proud Hera his wife. There also was the shining sun god and his sister, the silver-footed moon goddess. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, came too, and Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, and many others. In the midst of the festivities, there entered suddenly Ares, the goddess of discord. She alone among the gods had not been invited. That's rude. But this did not prevent her from making an unwelcome appearance. Before anyone had time to cry, beware, she had cast a golden apple upon the table and then disappeared. Swift-footed Hermes seized the apple and read aloud the message inscribed upon it, for the fairest. Not even Ares herself could have wished for greater results from her clever plan. At once strife arose in the hall of feasting, for each goddess thought that she deserved the apple. Most eager of all was Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. And before them, mortal maidens and lesser goddesses wisely became silent. Among these three, the quarrel rose higher and higher until Zeus commanded that a judge should decide the question once and for all and let them have peace. He was unwilling to make the decision himself, for he knew that to choose one would be to risk the wrath of the other two. He's a smart man. So he announced that he would appoint a judge who should declare which goddess was the fairest. To Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, he said, take yourselves with all due haste to Mount Ida or Ida. There you will find a fair young shepherd tending to the flocks. Indeed, it is said that there is no man fairer. He shall decide to whom the the apple belongs to. The three goddesses soon came to the mountainside where Paris tended the sheep, and handing him the golden apple, they asked to whom he would award it. The youth gazed upon them in wonder, quite unable to say which one was the most beautiful. He was like, you're all ugly. He didn't say that, I'm just kidding. Each goddess in turn tried to win his favor by offering gifts. First, Hero spoke, tempting him with the promise of a mighty empire and great wealth. Athena offered him glory and victory in war, and wisdom, which would make him worthy of all honor. But then Aphrodite smiled upon him and whispered close into his ear, choose me for a youth, and I will give you the fairest woman in the world for your wife. At her words, Paris forgot the longing for wealth and power that Hera's offered had sparked in him. He forgot his desire for victory and wisdom. To Aphrodite, he gave the golden apple. This judgment of Paris was the beginning of many troubles. Little did he know that his choice meant ruin for his country and for thousands of happy men and women. Herein Athena departed with hearts full of wrath, but Aphrodite smiled upon Paris and told him to bid his time until her promise should be fulfilled. From that day, Paris was restless and discontented. He no longer cared to tend his flocks upon the mountain, or to strive with the young shepherds in the foot race and wrestling match. One morning, he left his mountain home and went down to the city of Troy. On that day, he chanced that great games were being held there, and Paris, taking part in the sports, put to shame all the other young men. For Aphrodite had given him godlike strength and swiftness. King Priam, seeing Paris in action, asked, "Who is this young noble youth? Of what family and what place? I know him not, yet he seems to be almost as familiar as one of my own sons." No one knew, so they began to ask about. And at length the old shepherd stepped from among the spectators and told the king that Paris was really the prince who had been left on the mountainside to die. Upon hearing this, Priam and Hecuba received their lost son joyfully, giving no thought to the prophecy that should be the ruin of their city. Paris came to dwell in the king's palace and returned no more to the shepherd's home. Honors were given heaped upon him, and riches and power were at his command. Yet he never forgot the promise of Aphrodite, nor ceased to long for its fulfillment. Greedy man, greedy, greedy, greedy. All right, here comes another side of a story. The beautiful Helen. Ooh. At this time, one lady was by far the fairest in the world, Helen, the daughter of King Tyndarus. Tyndarus. Every young prince heard of her beauty and all desired to marry her. Helen's father, King Ty, was a wise man. When he saw kings and princes coming from afar to seek his daughter's marriage, he knew that only one of them could be made happy, and he did not wish the others to become their enemies. Therefore, before he chose a husband for Helen, as was the custom of the time, he gathered the suitors before him and spoke thus. This is at a time women couldn't pick their husbands. If they could, they'd probably all be single anyway. You do me great honor, my lords, but there is something which troubles me. You are many, and my daughter can have but one husband. How will it be when she makes her choice? Will I have only one friend and a score of enemies? My daughter would rather die unmarried than bring trouble upon me and my people. Therefore, her resolve is this: you must swear a great oath that you will defend her and her husband, whomever she may choose, and that if he or she suffers any wrong, you will avenge it. Mm. These words pleased the suitors, and they all pledged that they would defend Helen and her husband against all injury that might be done to them. So Helen was wed to Menelaus, king of the part of Greece called Laconia, or Laconia. No, it's Laconia, I think. Famed for the strength of its warriors, he took her to his palace in the capital city of Sparta. As for the disappointed suitors, they were men of honor, so they went home in peace, vowing to come to Helen's defense if ever they should be called. So they were like, even though she didn't choose us, we're going to come. Years went by, and at length Paris was sent by his father, King Priam, to Troy, on a mission to Greece. He came to Sparta and was received with his hospitality befitting a prince from faraway land. King Menelaus ordered a great feast at which Paris was the guest of honor. That night, amidst the fine wine and pleasing conversations, Paris first looked upon the face of Helen, and Aphrodite whispered to him that this was the woman she had promised for him as a wife. How do you promise someone else's wife to someone? The math's not mathing. Paris knew that he had never seen and never could see a lady so lovely and gracious as Helen. I want to see this Helen. And so while Menelaus was away and with Aphrodite's aid, he stole the beautiful Helen and departed in his ships for Troy. How do you steal someone's wife? That's like bold and scary. When Menelaus returned and learned what had happened, he was filled with grief and rage. He vowed to make war upon Troy and bring it to its dust. Yes. Get that girl. He called upon the kings and princes of Greece to remember their pledge and come to his aid. This call was not to their liking, and some were reluctant to obey. But at last a great army was gathered together. 100,000 men and 1,200 ships made ready to cross the sea to Troy to punish Paris and to restore Helen to Menelaus. Even the gods took sides. Here in Athena had never forgiven Paris. Therefore, they favored the Greeks, women. I love us. We can hold a grudge. But Aphrodite used her power to help the Trojans. Apollo, god of the sun, and Ares, god of war, or Ares, also were on the sides of the Trojans. And so it was that a great army prepared for war, determined to defend the honor of Greece. All rallied to the cause, all but two, Odysseus and Achilles. Let's see who they are. Odysseus. One of the greatest of the suitors who had pledged themselves to Helen's defense was Odysseus. I hope I'm saying this name right. This noble king was famed alike for his brave deeds and for a sharp and active mind, always ready for any turn of events. For many years now, he had ruled his island home in peace. He had a fair young wife, Penelope, and a little son, I'm just going to say Telly. whom he loved dearly. When the message came from Menelaus asking his help in the rescue of Helen, he was at first unwilling to go. It seemed to him a wild and foolish undertaking. It had been prophesied that if he went on this journey, he would not return to his house for 20 years. He thought of the pain and trouble and warlike work of these 20 years and looked on the loving faces of his wife and son and chose to return no answer to Menelaus. He was like, no, I love my kid. I love my mom, not my mom, my wife. But the leaders of the Greeks were not willing to lose so good a warrior. When they received no reply to their message, Menelaus and some of his companions set out to journey to the land of Odysseus and find out the reason. Odysseus, hearing that they had come, determined to trick them. He was pretending to be crazy. By pretending that he was out of his mind, he put on his richest garments, yoked an ox and a mule to his plow, and went out into his fields. As he plowed, he scattered salt into the furrows, pretending that he thought it was seed. He didn't trick them, though. But for once, there was someone more clever than he. One of the followers of Menelaus suspected that Odysseus was playing a trick upon them and decided to find out whether he was really mad or not. Mad means like crazy, like not all there. Just as a plow came opposite to him, the man suddenly took the baby son of Odysseus from the arms of the nurse and placed him on the ground directly in front of the ox. The sight of his son's danger made Odysseus forget his acting. He turned the plow aside and sprang forward to save his child. So Menelaus and his companions knew that the madness of Odysseus was a trick. After this, Odysseus could no longer find any excuse for remaining at the house. But though he had been unwilling to set up upon this war, he proved one of the greatest of its heroes. Indeed, it was not very long after this that he was able to do the Greeks a great service. So that's his story. The godlike Achilles. Here we go. Here's another part, another character in this big story. One of the fairest of the Greek youths was Achilles. He was the son of King Peleus. Is it Peleus? Peleus? And the sea nymph. Remember this. This was from before. Thetis, at whose wedding the apple of discord had fallen. Okay, that was their wedding, where the apple came from. What a gift. They should have invited Ares, and none of this would have happened. Moral of the story: invite everybody. His godlike beauty was like that of Thetis, his mother, and he had the warlike strength of his kingly father. He was trained with the greatest care in all manly exercises and showed greater strength of valor than any other youth of the land. When Helen was stolen away and all Greece rose in arms to rescue her, Thetis was sad at heart. Zeus himself had told her that if Achilles went to this war, he would never return alive. Thetis knew well that this was true. She herself was immortal because she was a sea nymph and belonged to the race of the gods, but Achilles was in part mortal. When he was a baby, his mother had desired to make him immortal. So she had carried him to the dark realm of the underworld and had bathed him there in the waters of the river Styx. The water of this river had much power that whatever it touched was saved from any mortal harm forever. But there was one tiny spot upon his heel that had not been touched by the water. It was a place where Thetis had held him when she dipped him in the stream. She had forgotten to bathe it until she had returned to the earth once more, and it was then too late. This one spot upon his heel she knew would cause his death. Before the first clash of arms sounded throughout Greece, Thetis had hurried Achilles away to an island across the sea. There she hid him, dressed as a girl, among the daughters of the king of that island. So she dressed him up as a girl to try to hide him so they wouldn't take him to the war. The Greek leaders had been told by a trusted wise man that their war would not be successful unless the young, youthful Achilles accompanied them to Troy. The leaders therefore sought Achilles at his father's court, but he was not to be found. Remember, she dressed him as a girl. Odysseus then set out to discover where the youth was hidden. At length, he found out that what Theseus had done, and he set out once for the island. The boy was so well disguised that no one could have guessed that he was not a girl, but Odysseus devised a plan to discover him. Dressing himself as a traveling merchant, he gained entrance to the king's garden, where the maidens were playing. From a large pack he carried, he brought forth golden rings, shining jewelry, and brightly colored scarves, which the maidens all examined eagerly, so all the girls ran to these things. All except one tall maiden who stood aside and seemed to care little for them. Well, because that was Achilles. Odysseus noted her kneeling and determined to test her further. He drew from his pack a splendid sword, its blade sharp, strong, and gleaming in the sun. At once the tall maiden stepped forth and grasped the hilt and swung the sword with ease and delight. Odysseus was now certain that this was the youth whom he had sought. He announced his errand and called upon Achilles to join the Greeks in their war against the Trojans. The boy, weary of his soft and easy life, readily agreed to accompany them. He returned at once to his father's court to make ready. His mother, telling him of Zeus's prophecy, tearfully begged him to remain at home, but Achilles could not be moved. He girded on his shining armor and prepared himself for battle. Gathering his father's trusted warriors, he bade them make ready to go with him. They answered his summons with glad hearts, for they were proud to accompany this youth who was destined to perform mighty deeds. But Theseus watched her. Oh, I think it's Thetis. Thetis watched them depart in their great ships with a heavy heart. She feared that never again should she behold her godlike son. Moral of the story: always invite Iris. If she was invited to that wedding,